Finally, we can celebrate something pretty amazing that's happened in AI in October 2024. Because for the first time, we have not only one or two or three, but four Nobel Prize winners as a direct result of AI. Yes, you heard that right. Let's get after it.
Welcome to AI Geeks.
For the love of AI. AIGeeks.com.
What is up, everybody? I hope you're doing really well. Welcome to the AI Geeks podcast. I'm your host, Tim El-Sheikh. I'm back. Yes, I've been away for about a couple of weeks now. Been very busy stuff happening at my company, Nobel-Prize, or releasing new updates. And I've also been to a few events where I was invited to speak. So yeah, loads of things to talk about. There's so much that happened. It's only been 2 weeks, but it feels like 2 years. Oh my goodness. But definitely the thing that I really want to talk about is this pretty amazing news that kind of made me happy, because Demis Hassabis, who's the co-founder of DeepMind, just won the Nobel Prize in chemistry. And I feel really cool about it, because for those who don't know, I basically was part of the same cohort at Google campus back in 2014, the same cohort where DeepMind emerged, and many, frankly, the who of the AI world today was there. We were in that tiny little crappy building on Bonhill Street. But it was an amazing experience. I mean, I feel so privileged and lucky that I was part of that. So to see that Hassabis and of course, well, DeepMind, this is really great news for DeepMind in general, have achieved this phenomenal achievement. It's truly amazing, because I think I moved into Google campus probably, I think it was around the same time when they were being acquired by Google. I don't know if they were acquired already or they were in the process of doing it, but there was a lot of buzz in the building because they were like, yeah, hey, one of us has just been acquired by Google. Yeah. So absolutely brilliant news. But more interestingly, in fact, that it's not just him, of course, but also Geoffrey Hinton, who is known as the godfather of AI, or one of the godfathers of AI. To be honest with you, I don't like these sort of terms because, there's so many significant figures that really played a huge role in AI. In my opinion, I think if we're to talk about mothers and fathers, for me, the mother of AI is Ada Lovelace, because she was the first mathematician in history, I think, that basically came up with this whole concept and vision of mathematical machines that can think for themselves, right? So maybe she should be seen as the mother of AI. I don't know, but I think that's not that important. But it's really cool to see that the key innovators of the world of AI are getting this recognition. Because one of the things that I've been complaining about for such a long time, and I've done it, I think, on this podcast as well, I'm sure, with my discussions with my guests. And in fact, I'm discussing this very problem with my next guest. And I just said there, we probably shouldn't be calling people fathers or mothers of something, but this particular guest, she is genuinely the mother of a whole industry, because that industry didn't really exist. She pretty much redefined it, she created it, and now it's a thriving industry. I'm not going to tell you who it is, because I would like you to subscribe, hit the notification bell, so YouTube will then tell you that that video is out. It will be out next week. I've already recorded it, and we've got actually a couple of other recordings that are already in the pipeline. And you absolutely need to listen to this conversation. It's so cool. I mean, I like this entrepreneur very much. Again, she is from the same sort of background as myself, or same sort of, I suppose, vintage. Because if you look at everybody that, even like the Nobel Prize winners are basically people of my age or older. Because the thing is about innovation, it takes time. It takes a very long time. So many different people involved, so many ideas that kind of, a soup of ideas where we kind of try to come up with something new, or we argue, we knock our heads together, and then something totally irrelevant comes up and it turns out to be the idea that we need to look at. But what we're seeing today, and one of the reasons I think why I know, in fact, one of the reasons why I kind of walked away from the whole VC investor funded world of tech, because I think 2014, and maybe I'm being biased, please feel free to correct me if I am being biased, but I feel that we were the last cohort of entrepreneurs that basically were genuinely coming up from really strong scientific backgrounds and try to use AI and technology to solve really complicated problems. Effectively, we're building what is known as deep tech companies. So for those who don't know what deep tech means, basically companies and startups that are involved in research and development. A lot of deep techs tend to be spin-offs from university research, like Google, for example. But that was the period, 2014, that was the period when we started to see more and more investors throwing money at startups that basically doing other things that in my opinion, with all due respect, are not that important. They're fun, don't get me wrong, but if you start seeing things like, VCs throwing money at, I don't know, an app that helps you design your own underwear and socks. Or if you're probably old enough, you remember there are investors that invested in an app that all it did was to say yo. Basically, it's an app that allows you to send yo to somebody, and somebody sends yo back to you. I think they raised like over $1 million or something ridiculous like that. And that was the shift that I started to notice, that more and more cash has been effectively thrown at these sort of things as opposed to deep tech startups. And I think that is ridiculous, actually. And I've been calling this out for quite a long time because I think, we need to get our priorities right. And we have even see that with AI today. And I'm going to probably sound like a proper old fart that's complaining, like, hey, in the good old days, we were investing in, smart people. And now look at them, we're investing in all these idiots. I'm not saying that, by the way. I'm not saying that. But I'm simply saying that we are now in a situation where you don't have to come up with a great idea, but you need to come up with something that is hypeable. You know what I'm saying? Like, if it's in the hype, you can go on there and you can raise shitloads of money. In fact, like one of the events that I've been to, it was at Loughborough University. So for those, again, if you don't know Loughborough University, I know we have quite a lot of listeners from the US and outside the UK. Loughborough is one of the world leading universities in sports science and engineering. They've done quite a lot of work, for example, with companies like Adidas for material science to come up with best materials, for, sport clothing or whatever. But like world leading Olympians travel all the way to Loughborough to basically test all of the latest AI stuff, interestingly enough. In fact, I spoke in one of their events earlier this year where we had a lot of British Olympians there. We were discussing AI. So I was part of the panel where we were trying to explain to them, what they can and cannot do with AI. Obviously, in my case, I was basically trying to bust all the hype and help them understand that they shouldn't really jump on this hype bandwagon and what is potentially possible for them to use AI for. And I speak also as an ex-pro athlete myself. So I could connect the two worlds a little bit. But the thing that I remember from that event at Loughborough, because I know the head of their innovation quite well. In fact, he's somebody I've known for a few years. And he was telling me that they get some amazing deep tech spin-offs and they just can't get any VC cash, hardly. And if they do, it's just trickles of cash. We're talking about a few hundred thousands here and there, which is nothing. I mean, when you have some shitty, useless chatbots raising tens of millions, that's kind of crazy. I mean, so much so that he told me that Loughborough and a group of other universities, they literally decided, you know what, let's just create our own fund, like chip in a little bit of cash here and there. I mean, they still managed to raise like a few $1 million or pounds. I mean, so it's still good fun. Again, in my opinion, that's nowhere near enough. And to me, that's frustrating, actually, because if we're talking about innovation comes from science. You don't get innovation from apps that help you design underwear. No offense, but you don't. You can get some new ideas for sure, but you can even get more innovation. Funnily enough, actually, you can get a lot more innovation from games. In fact, video games on the app, consoles, there's a lot of amazing tech in there. Like all of the game engines, like Unreal Engine. That's a phenomenal innovation. And in fact, you can use Unreal Engine in molecular visualization. I mean, I know some scientists actually use Unreal Engine for molecular visualization for them to help in proteomics and material science, that sort of thing. But I want you guys to understand the point I'm making here. I think I probably mentioned this with one of the podcasts. I think it was probably with Jeremy Leavesley, which you can check out here. He's an award-winning mathematician. And I made a point to him that I feel that in the last 10 years, basically since 2014, I don't feel that there's been a lot of innovation. It's like somehow the last cohort of entrepreneurs, basically, we were lucky. We were the lucky ones. I was one of the lucky ones, obviously. These guys were some of the lucky ones. And indeed, even Sam Altman, right, at OpenAI was one of the lucky ones because OpenAI is more than 10 years old, right? Officially, yeah, they launched in 2015. But of course, like with any launch, when you build a company, you don't just build it in one day, right? It's several months, sometimes even years. I mean, Nebula, my company, yeah, we officially launched Nebula in 2019. But actually, I worked with a team that my data scientists for many years before that. And in fact, the idea of Nebula started to brew in my head in around probably 2017. And it was in 2018 that we started to assemble things together. We even had customers before we launched, just to test the waters. So yeah, officially Nebula was launched in 2019, but actually the operation, the team, the ideas, the R&D we've been doing this for probably, I would say, a year before that. So don't expect something like OpenAI was just emerged just like that. No, it's been probably many, many months before that. And then don't forget also the core technology that, of course, on which GPT was built, which is the transformers technology. That was Google's R&D, which was released before that. So, and that's what I'm saying. Innovation comes from multiple ideas, from multiple sources that just somehow come together through a lot of effort, a lot of R&D, and just over time, it just takes, like good wine. It takes time to become tasty, to become pretty substantive in the outcomes. But what investors are not very good at is patience, because that's not what they do. They need to get as much money as possible as soon as possible. And I'm not trying to knock investors out in here, but I'm basically complaining about the system because, when I started as an entrepreneur, I actually was lucky. I really count myself as really, really lucky because I had access to funds, from banks. Yeah, remember those? Banks used to give you money. Can you believe that? That's before the financial crash. I became an entrepreneur in 2002. And I try to remember the first time I actually decided to get investors. It was probably in 2007, 2008. So few years after I set up my first company, which was an ad network. And at the time, actually, investors did not really, certainly in the UK, they didn't have any appetite to support startups. But that wasn't a problem because you just go to the bank and you raise whatever money you need. I can't remember exactly how much I raised, but it wasn't huge. It was in the tens of thousands, of dollars or pounds. Which is, for a startup, that's pretty cool. And then when we were ready, when we were about, I think we were like probably 4 or 5 years old already, we already like had almost 6 million users. That's a big deal back then, 6 million users. And we had basically a very good proposition to bring investors in. Of course, the financial crash happened. The bankers fucked everything up. And of course, the rest is history. And pretty much startups became overly reliant on investors. But the problem with investors, they always want ROI, return on their investment. And typically they look for 3 to 5 year exit plan. Maybe sometimes if they're generous, maybe 6 to 7 years. But typically it's 3 to 5 years exit plan because at the end of the day, they need to pump the cash. Then they need to get that cash back with at least 10x worth of returns. And the problem with that, this idea is not actually compatible with deep tech. Because like I just said, innovation takes a long time. You can't innovate in 3 years. You can't innovate in 5 years. And even when you do, what tends to happen? And again, I speak from experience. I'm a deep tech entrepreneur for many years. And basically what tends to happen, let's say you manage to come up with a product at the end of it after 10 years of research and development, right? But even if this product is ready, there's no guarantee that people want to buy that product. A lot of deep tech startups tend to fail as well, not because they run out of cash, although many of them tend to fail because they run out of cash. I personally know at least three deep tech startups that run by amazing ex-professors, proper geniuses with technology that's just phenomenal. And it just didn't work. Nobody wanted to buy. There was even one startup I knew that they wanted to sell, they kind of wanted to be like DeepMind and they wanted to be acquired by Google. Because that period of 2013, 2014, Google was on a spending spree buying AI companies. Like they bought Boston Dynamics at the time, the robotics company, and of course they bought DeepMind. And during that period, I knew one company that they wanted to sell to Google as well. They were involved in AI as well, and they wanted to sell that to Google. The point I'm making is that it's not easy. You come up with a product after 10 years of research and it might not sell. And even if you identify a market, let's say, for example, in biotech, you know that there's a market. Let's say you manage to come up with a new drug. You know that there's a market, quote unquote, market for that drug. Let's say if it's cancer. Then you have to figure out, well, how do you produce that drug into the market? What are the costs of production, manufacturing, distribution? Can you sell it to a big pharma company? Do you want to sell it to a big pharma company? Now, if you have VCs, of course, they would want you to sell to a big pharma company because that's how they get the ROI. So yeah, for me, that's why I've been saying for years, and I said this on this podcast, I think governments need to do something about this. They need to intervene because they can. Why not? Governments go on about they want to be the leader in this and the leader in that. And of course, now AI is the talking point about everything. So they want to be the leader in AI. Well, you can't be the leader in AI when the business community and the investment community prioritizing apps that create all some bullshit AI powered crap, as opposed to companies like DeepMind and dare I say it, even my company, although I'm not looking for investors, but companies like DeepMind that actually have used AI to solve real world problems. And I even had some comments here on this channel where people say, oh, man, this is just too complicated, blah, blah, blah. Well, there you go, my friends. They've won the Nobel-Prize. Yeah. So that means it's serious. It's real. And in fact, I'm not going to go into the detail. I'm going to put a link in the description because, of course, if those of you don't know, we've got a journal, AI Geeks journal, which you can go at aigeeks.com/journal. And this is where we share links and articles that we think are really interesting for you to check out. So we actually included full articles and press releases about the winning criteria, what each one of these Nobel Prize winners have done and who they are, et cetera, et cetera. So it's really, really cool stuff. I've got the links in the description so you can check it out. So I don't want to waste your time going over that here. But really, I want to discuss the idea that the deep tech sector is a fundamentally important sector, not just for business, but for science as well. But even again, you see that with the pharmaceutical sector, I guess, there's a lot of money there. If it's successful, you can make shitloads of money, right? But the way the market is set, the way the system is set, that's not the priority. The priority is prioritizing the interest of shareholders and investors, which is the reason why I don't want investors in my company. I don't want investors to have any influence in how we do our thing at Nebula with, pushing for ethical models and responsible models to prove that you can actually build smarter AI models through ethics. So it's smarter because of the ethics rather than despite of the ethics, if that makes sense, right? Because the argument that we're seeing today, in fact, arguments made by some VCs that, by adding more regulation and you're adding more guardrails or whatever, you're basically stifling innovation or you're making the AI dumber. Well, actually, no, you're actually forcing yourself to be a bit more creative and think about how can you not copy other people's content and make the AI actually generate new content. How about that? That's hard. Yes, I know. But of course, you don't want that because you want to pump and dump. That's all you want, right? Again, I know not every investor thinks like that, but I'm afraid the vast majority do. And the system kind of allows them to do it. Hey, sorry for interrupting the episode. Just wanted to talk to you about something very, very quickly. Since we are discussing deep tech, AI, and innovation, and in fact, the whole world is talking about AI and innovation today. Yet, according to McKinsey, the consultancy firm, 94% of leaders are not fully satisfied with their innovation performance. In fact, as of 2024, McKinsey also found that 91% of leaders don't feel very prepared to implement AI safely. Now, I don't know about you, but if a market is offering you AI strategy and innovation and all these cool ideas and products and services, yet 91% to 94% of the market don't feel satisfied, to me, that's called failure. That's why I want to introduce you to Nebula. Nebula is a self-financed, independent, investor-free, shareholder-free innovation partner that is designed specifically to prioritize your innovation and your success. One of the things that we're offering is called innovation as a service. As the name suggests, it's all about making sure that we provide you with all of the key elements that you need for your innovation success. In fact, we've got 4 labs that start with the creative lab, where we apply design-led research to de-risk ideas and opportunities with rapid discovery, experimentation, prototyping, and piloting your ventures to make sure that your ROI is safe. Let's also have human lab to explore human drivers, desires, and decisions required for successful change and targeted personalization to make sure that your people that you're targeting are served the way they need to be served. We have data lab, which unlocks the power of your data to drive forward your competitive advantage. And of course, it's supported by specialist large language models and small language models with deep vertical understanding that is relevant to your specific needs and your specific industry. Last but not least, of course, is the AI lab, where we use it to deploy powerful knowledge-based AI models for your specific specialist applications. One of the things that I'm really proud about with Nebula is the fact that our independence is literally your advantage, because we don't have shareholders that tell us how to push our narrative onto our customers. We're not here desperately trying to sell you particular models or try to lock you in like a typical long-term vendor lock-ins. We don't do any of that because we prioritize your innovation success. So to get started, to see what we can do potentially together, just head over to nebuli.com/start. That's Nebuli, nebuli.com/start. And let's see what we can do together. You never know, we might discover the unknown. Or we can just solve some problems together. Either way, we're good. So let's get together. Let's see if we can help you to be ready for what comes next. And now, back to the episode. I mentioned earlier about the financial crash in 2008, 2008, around that time. I don't want to remember it because it wasn't a good period. But what was the problem then? The problem was the bankers. And even though people blame the bankers, and, for example, even with this episode, I might sound as if I'm blaming the investors. I'm not, actually. Investors do what investors do. They should be doing what they're doing, actually. Pump and dump. Yes, that's their job. Their LPs, their funders expect them to do that because they're not a charity. They're not there just to throw money and get nothing. Of course, they need to put money into something, invest into something, and get a return. Of course, that's their job, right? But that does not mean that you don't regulate them or somehow provide some kind of mechanism where the government can subsidize to ensure that they prioritize investing in important businesses rather than just random businesses, right? So going back to the bankers' point, there was a period, for example, in the UK, of course, we were hit hard by the financial crash because, of course, London is a financial center. And I remember the media at the time were going that, the bankers were the number one enemies. And the bankers are this and the bankers are that. I remember there was an event there. I can't remember which event, but it was like I spoke in an event where I was saying, actually, I don't blame the bankers at all. Yes, they were the cause, but you didn't regulate them. Bankers do what bankers do. If you take a gambler, right, to Las Vegas, you gave him loads of money and you tell them, hey, go on a spending spree, knock yourself out. I don't think the gambler would be like, no, I'll be responsible. I'm not going to spend the money because I need to be very responsible. Really? Are you for real? Of course that's not going to happen. So when our government here decided not to regulate the bankers, what the hell did you expect? Did you expect them to be like, you know what, we're not going to spend our money. We're not going to go crazy with our risk taking and all that stuff. I mean, come on, what the fuck are you talking about? Yeah, seriously, use your brain. So yeah, bankers caused the financial crash, but they're not the ones to blame. You should blame the government for not regulating the market, allowing them to go crazy. And I think it's the same thing here. When you see governments that say, hey, let the markets figure out what is right, what's wrong, let the VCs figure out what's right and what's wrong. My friends, I met a VC once, years and years ago, very experienced person. It was really funny. And he said something to me, that the key skill of an investor is to have the ability to turn bullshit into gold. So when you see politicians like libertarians especially, they say, oh, no, let the investors know better. Let them decide what to invest in. The investors not going to be thinking about, okay, which innovative company should I invest in? No, they're going to be thinking about which company should I invest in that can make me shitloads of money really, really quickly. What's the hype, right? How can I take advantage of this hype? I.e., how can I take advantage of the bullshit, turn this bullshit into gold? And again, should you blame them? No, because that's what they do. That's their job. Right? If I ever become an investor, that would be exactly my mindset. I'm not going to be thinking, I need to invest in some company that does this paradigm shifting, patent pending, blah, blah, blah. No, fuck that. I'll be like, actually, okay, where's the money? What's making me the cash? I mean, I made money from crypto, not because I believe in crypto, because I was like, actually, that's an interesting opportunity. Yeah, I'm jumping in. I'm going to check this out. Right? Although I did actually, with my previous startup, we actually thought about using blockchain to see what happens if you combine blockchain with AI. And at the time we used Ethereum ERC20. It was ridiculously slow. It was like, nah, ain't gonna work. Although there's one person actually that has been working on that for quite a long time, and I think he's still working on that. And in fact, he's going to be featured in this podcast shortly, because you see, the point I was making is that the deep tech sector is actually in trouble right now. So if you are expecting investors to do something about it, they're not going to do anything. Governments need to intervene. Like, for example, in the UK, and again, please feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. Say this below, because I haven't raised any investment for quite a while now, because I said I'm not interested in this anymore. But in the UK, back around 2014, I was raising funds at the time. And there was a scheme in the UK, which I thought was brilliant. And I think the UK was probably the only country in the world that was doing this. We had a scheme here, and I think we still have it today. It's called the Enterprise Investment Scheme. So it's EIS. That's how we call it. But there was a seed version called the SEIS, so Seed EIS. And the idea was encouraging investors to invest in startups, because in the UK especially, investors did not really want to invest in startups. It was like too risky, and British investors and frankly European investors in general, they tend to be quite risk averse compared to their cousins in the United States. And in 2014, and even before that, I mean, like I said earlier, for example, I did not even think about going anywhere near investors when I started my first company, because I'm like, okay, I was a recent graduate, I was a nobody. I'm like, they wouldn't even look at me, and I was in my early 20s as well. So they're like, a 20-something year old. In those days, being a business person meant that you were like a middle-aged person and above. Like I remember I went to conferences at the time, and I was always the youngest guy there. I was like the 20-something year old surrounded by 50+ year olds. You know what I mean? So yeah, feels like such a long time because I'm reaching that point myself now. But at the time, I wouldn't even contemplate the idea of going anywhere near investors. Like I said, I went to investors when my company was already around 5 years old, and we already established ourselves. We already had millions of users, etc. You know what I mean? So we had something to showcase. But the idea that you, as a seed startup, you would go to an investor and ask for money, you wouldn't do that. That's in the UK I'm talking about. And the UK government quite cleverly decided to, you know what? We need to come up with a scheme that encourages investors to invest in seed startups. So basically companies that are under 3 years old or 5 years old, right? So they came up with a seed EIS and EIS. Basically what it means, if you're a company, if you're a startup that is under 3 years old, so in that case you're seed, you would get an investment fund, though it was tiny. I mean, at the time it was like about 150,000, I think, pounds. So that's like $200,000-ish, which is not huge, but it's not bad. But you get that money. In return, whoever that invests in your company will get humongous tax reliefs. So much so that basically they can get their money back through tax reliefs. So it is literally them giving you money with one hand, taking it back from the government through tax reliefs. I think that's fantastic. That was brilliant. So the government intervened. The government identified that there was a very serious problem of investors not investing in startups. And startups are the heart of the economy. Yes, they are. Not the big corporations. These startups are the heart of the economy. And of course, post the financial crash, pre-financial crash, in fact, startups like myself were dependent on banks. And the banks, like I said, they were lending and they were doing their job. Since the financial crash, the banks became totally useless and still are today in 2024. But that was a problem. So, basically the government for once became quite entrepreneurial about it. They're like, okay, there's a gap in the market. We need to fill it now because it's a problem. Right. Let's intervene. Let's provide incentives to investors to invest in startups in the UK. And guys, it was amazing. It was amazing. In fact, one of the reasons I strongly believe that one of the key reasons why the London Silicon Roundabout was started to thrive so well back in 2012, between 2012 and 2014. So the period when I moved in there, and that's when, DeepMind's has emerged as well, because that money started to flow. Like, London is the financial center. So a lot of bankers, like super rich bankers, were all basically just down the road from Google campus, and they would just come in, just give cash. You obviously had to pitch them, like they didn't just throw money at us, but we had to pitch, of course. But the idea that we, a company that is probably barely a year old, we could go to an investor, not necessarily a VC, but an investor, and ask for money and to get money. Whoa, that was amazing. It really changed everything. It changed everything. Now, I don't know if other countries have done that. I think at the time, the UK was the only country in the world that did something like that. But that just shows how government intervention in a productive way, where they work closely with investors and the business community, where they say, okay, look, we really need to support this part of the business sector urgently. Look, please, investors, you've got the cash. You've got a lot of money sitting around doing nothing. Yeah, that's true. Let's do something together, right? We'll give you loads of incentives if you invest in these startups. Deal? Deal. Great. Let's do this. We need something like that with DeepTech now, right now, because all of the money right now has been thrown around into everything other than a DeepTech company. And unfortunately, as you're going to see from my conversation with my next guest, even if you're a company that is a deep tech company, you're very, very ethical, you're focusing on, literally, in her case, she invented the market, literally. But as soon as investors come in, they start changing things. And you're like, come on, man. I mean, that's just, no. And she walked away from her own company. And I'm seeing a lot of stories like that, guys. There's a lot of stories out there where entrepreneurs, the founders of their own companies, walking away because their companies have become unrecognizable as soon as the VCs came in, because they just started to change everything and just became something else. And more importantly, in many cases, in fact, the quality of the innovation started to drop. Why? Because the priority, like I just said, is what? Making ROI, the return on the investment. So the priority that the investors have is not to say, okay, we want to invest in the research because we think it's important. We want to invest in this company so we can sell it off, pump and dump. And the casing point for this is this article that somehow I did not see this article. This article was actually published in 2020, and somehow I didn't see it. And I came across it now, literally just before I started recording this. And we were baffled when we read this because we were like, my God, this is actually so true. And, this was, like I said, this is in 2020. I would argue that it's even worse today. So basically, the article says, and again, the link is in the description, DeepMind, the very company now that basically won the Nobel-Prize, would have probably failed without Google, says an early investor. And this early investor is actually the guy, it's somebody, I don't know him that well, but we met, I think, a couple of times through a VC, is Sheikh, who's the founder of a company called Fetch AI. So they actually, if I remember correctly, because that was a few years back, so I think they combined IoT with AI and blockchain, and they've done something pretty clever with these things. I don't know the detail. I mean, I know they offered some sort of crypto tokens as well and so on, but they actually, no, it's a legit. It's not typical weird token crypto stuff. It's actually legit. Oh well, at least it used to be. I mean, I said I'm not in touch with them today, but when I met them years ago, it was actually a very interesting project. But anyway, he's a founding investor of DeepMind. And he told CNBC that London AI lab would have probably failed if Google hadn't bought it for a reported $600 million in 2014. Facebook was also interested in buying DeepMind, but ultimately the company accepted Google's offer. Commercialization of any AI-based company is very difficult unless you get absorbed by a big corporate, which is basically exactly what I said. And yeah, he's right. It is very, very difficult. I mean, he knows it because he runs a deep tech company. I'm running a deep tech company now, and I did before as well. It's very, very difficult, guys. It's not easy, right? It's not like developing an app. When I tell people, for example, with AI, you want to deploy AI in your company, basically you have to have a deep tech mindset. This is not developing an app or a website. Once you go down the road of trying to innovate through AI, you have to do a lot of things. You basically have to become a deep tech company, or at least you have to create a department, which is your deep tech department that is responsible for your AI deployment. This is where basically my company Nebulae helps companies to do, because not every company has data scientists and AI experts or whatever. So effectively, we become their deep tech department to help them deploy their AI strategy, their data strategy, and everything that comes around it. And we become that deep tech journey, and that effectively the company becomes quite dependent upon, right? No vendor lock-in, obviously, but we build it for them. So all the IP becomes theirs. So we're not actually keeping any IP at all. But the idea here is that we basically showing companies what innovation looks like, what it means, and how you need to think. Because unfortunately, a lot of companies, especially corporations, they think that innovation is like, just get a bunch of guys together and just create something new, and boom, in a couple of years or even a few months, you'll have something new. No, that's not research and development. That's just developing a website or something. Yeah. Again, nothing wrong with developing a website. If you've got something to sell on the website, go for it. Develop a website, develop an app, right? If you've got a game and you want to incorporate something like Unreal Engine into it, go for it. Easy. But if you're talking about research and development and innovation, then you need to talk about research, development, and innovation, which means like you have to put the money there. You have to absolutely be very patient with it. You have to accept the reality that it's going to take many, many years for you to achieve anything before you see any results. That's the fact. And that's exactly what Sheikh says here. And to continue with the article, if you think about DeepMind on its own today, DeepMind would have probably failed as a company because you wouldn't be able to commercialize anything. That's true. I mean, that's R&D. Sometimes you can't commercialize it, but that does not mean that it's useless. DeepMind spokesperson said, "We chose Google as a partner because it was clear that they were passionate about AI as we were. And since then, our partnership has gone from strength to strength in pursuit of our shared long-term ambition of responsible and impactful AI." Sheikh, who claims to be a friend of the company's CEO and co-founder Demis Hassabis, of course, the winner of the Nobel Prize, said there were concerns about how DeepMind was ever going to make money from the beginning. And I quote, "We spent 5 years in close discussions about this whole DeepMind thing," he said. DeepMind set out to crack artificial intelligence, AGI. Okay, as you know, I'm not a big supporter of the whole idea of AGI. We'll leave that for another day, probably, which is often referred to as the holy grail in AI. But Sheikh said the concern, the question mark, have always been in commercialization. How do you do it? And that is really the question that investors ask all the time. I mean, that's really a great example. And again, this is not an attack on Sheikh. I'm not saying Sheikh is wrong here. As I said, if I were an investor, that would have been the question, because I'm not here to throw money and get nothing. I mean, think about that. Imagine you have savings. Would you throw your money at something and expect nothing? Let's get real. Of course, you want something in return. But if VCs basically see deep tech companies as a potential financial burden because it's something that they're going to invest in and it's not necessarily going to commercialize anything. Because, like I said, you see, what DeepMind has achieved is scientifically significant. And they might not make money out of it. Somebody else might make money out of it. Perhaps a pharmaceutical company that would use their technology and, their capability of analyzing protein folding and molecular structures of protein, which is truly phenomenal and truly amazing, because that is something that I studied as a biomedical scientist. And it's one of those things that truly can revolutionize medicine forever. It's something that could even treat cancer, for example. I mean, that's remarkable. But would DeepMind make money from that? No, because it's not DeepMind that is going to create the cancer drugs based on that, but maybe some other company will. And investors will be like, well, okay, well, we didn't invest in DeepMind because so that somebody else can make money. But this is, well, that's innovation. That's innovation. And this is where the government should come in. The government will be like, okay, look, you might not make money directly from, say, DeepMind, but here's a subsidy, right? We're subsidizing that loss so that you can make that money through, I don't know, through some kind of tax reliefs or rewards or whatever, right? Because you supported a company like DeepMind that just revolutionized science that would help other pharmaceutical companies create new drugs. I'm just speaking hypothetically here, by the way, but I'm just trying to show you that how governments could potentially facilitate this relationship where, again, the true innovation environment, which, like I said earlier, involves so many different people, different entities working together to achieve a greater good for humanity. Because, I mean, right now, okay, I mean, let me show you this picture. I'm sure you guys seen this picture when Elon Musk decided to turn up to support Donald Trump. And again, I'm not trying to be political here and stuff like that, but look at this. I mean, what the hell? I mean, this is the guy that some people believe is smarter than Einstein. But I'm afraid, he represents a lot of tech entrepreneurs, because a lot of tech entrepreneurs basically try to copy that. And they are very good at attracting VC cash. Even though they're creating nothing, I mean, he made so many different promises and so many different, pretty sort of Hollywood-style nonsense about all sorts of different things. And the investors, yeah, all right, cool. Why? Because it's hype. Remember what I said earlier? Turn bullshit into gold. So for them, people like that, it's like an opportunity for them to make money for themselves. Not because they give crap about people like Elon. They don't care about Elon Musk. What they care about is like, okay, he's the kind of guy that knows how to create hype really, really well. Okay, it's full of shit, but it doesn't matter. We're going to turn that into gold, right? But when you have people like that representing innovation, my friends, we have a problem. And just as a side note, just have a look at Donald Trump's face here. Now, this is what I call the WTF face. When you see something weird and you're like, what? What the hell's going on there? So if you actually manage to weird out Trump himself, man, you've crossed the line. You managed to enter into the Twilight Zone. Oh my goodness. Well, that's the world that we live in. But again, I said this in the video here when I was being quite gloomy about the future, that if these guys end up basically controlling the world of regulation, the world of AI, my God, we're absolutely screwed. We're absolutely screwed. So yeah, it's a bit of a rant again, but I'm just, like I said, I'm happy to see that Hassab and DeepMind really achieved this recognition, because I think this recognition represents all of us involved in deep tech. I think it's a recognition that showcases the importance of deep tech. And what I am hoping, because governments have been asleep for a very long time, they shove their heads up their asses thinking about whatever political bullshit that they need to think about. And I'm just thinking, at least in the UK, because obviously DeepMind is a British creation. Okay, they're not a British company anymore because they belong to Google, but they are. We still see them as a British company, right? Because we all came out from the same incubation at Google campus in London. Okay, it wasn't a British campus nonetheless, but hey, who cares? It was in London. We're British. And I really feel, and I do indeed hope, that our current government in the UK takes notice and realizes, look, we need to support deep tech startups properly. Because, like I said, guys, there are loads of other amazing deep tech startups out there that are, I would say, as good as DeepMind. But they're not going to get the recognition because they're not going to get the money. Most likely they're going to die, because that's the world that we live in today. And one of the reasons, like I said, I decided to quit this whole thing and build a deep tech company, which is Nebulae, in a way that is different. Yes, we're not seeking investors. We are reliant on government funds. We are actually more reliant on our customers that pay us to do the R&D work for them. But the reason why we can do what we can do, because I'm in a very privileged position where I can do what I'm doing right now. Because, like I said, I was so fortunate to be part of that cohort. But today, if a new startup, a new entrepreneur, an aspiring entrepreneur, like I'm thinking, myself 20 years ago, if my 20-year-old self had to start a business today, oh my God, man, I would have struggled like hell, and basically would have achieved absolutely nothing, zero. And there's loads of people like that. And like I said, I spoken to amazing scientists at Loughborough University and actually other universities as well. And I thought to myself, man, these guys don't stand a chance. They are smart, they're amazing, they're talented. The work that they do, the R&D that they do is phenomenal, but the investors not give a flying shit about it. So governments need to do something. I am connected to a couple of MPs from the new government. In fact, I did say I can't remember which video, where I made a promise that I want to reach out to the new British government today, which I have. I've reached to Peter Kyle, who's the Secretary for Science, Media and Technology, and he was actually gracious enough to respond. He emailed me back and he said, "Yeah, I know we are, of course, we're still new. We're kind of figuring stuff out, but we are absolutely prioritizing innovation this time. We want to basically put our money where our mouth is. We want to prioritize ethics, but we're kind of figuring it out." Basically, that's what he said. Great, good start. Again, let's hope that they are serious about it. And Keir Starmer, our Prime Minister, has been talking about that. They want to achieve growth through AI, etc. Although, again, it sounds a little bit too political to me rather than realistic, because he didn't really explain how they're going to do it. We have a financial statement coming up from the Chancellor, so hopefully we'll see then what the government is planning to do to actually make the UK great again with AI, because we used to be before Brexit. Brexit fucked it up as usual. According to Tortoise Media, our rankings around the world is just dropping. I mean, we used to be close second to China. Like, just to give you an idea, like pre-Brexit, so the US was up way at the top, of course, with AI. China was kind of in a distant second, and we were right at the tail of China. We were almost second in the world alongside China. Now, we're barely holding on to the fourth place. And we've been overtaken. Guess which country that is right at our tail? France. And France, in the last year alone, they jumped by 15 places. Of course, they invested in Mistral, and they are putting a lot of resources into building an AI ecosystem in Paris. And man, it's flourishing. It's amazing, actually. So much so that I'm actually considering probably setting up something in Paris. That's how cool it is. And to me, it's heartbreaking. I mean, they are our competitors. So from my point of view, it's like, we were winning and now we're losing big time. I hope the government is listening. And I think you, as a listener, even if you're not in the UK, talk to your politicians, to your representatives, because if we truly want AI and innovation that serves us rather than serving just VCs, then governments have to intervene. There's no other way around it. The idea that investors are the ones that are going to make that decision is complete utter bollocks. That's not going to happen, because that's not how investors think. And again, this is not about blaming investors. I know some people, for example, on the left of politics say, all investors are evil or whatever. This has nothing to do with evil. This is how they make their living. This is just their job. That's it. That's how they do it. Whether you like it or not, it's irrelevant. That's just how it is. So how do you change that reality? The only people that have the power to change this reality is the government. And I've described an example with the SCIS and AI schemes. We need something like that for deep tech startups. Like now. We needed it many, many years ago. We've lost the ball completely in 2014. We totally lost it, because 2014, like I said, that was up to 2014, that startups in the tech sector were run by really, really smart people. Today, we're seeing less of that. Yet, they're the ones that are taking the cash. I mean, good on them. And they're playing the game really well. Great stuff, but that's not helping us, is it? Like, as in the economy, the AI economy, the innovation economy. It's not going to help us. It's not helping humanity, does it? That's my opinion. I mean, tell me what you think. Do you think the government should intervene? Do you have any other ideas? In fact, if you're from a country outside the UK and America, if your country is doing something that facilitates deep tech startups, share it with us below. Tell us what you think. Tell us what your country is doing. Because I think, as Raoul Lum the UK leading lawyer that I interviewed, which you can check the video here, he made the point that, if we are to really be successful in AI globally, and if we want AI to be the technology that serves humanity, there needs to be a global coalition, not just in terms of regulation, but innovation as well. We need to, as global community, to make that decision. How do we want this AI to evolve? And how do we want it to serve humanity? Right now, it's just basically throwing any crap in the wall and seeing what sticks. That's how it's working right now. And that's not innovation. It's not going anywhere. Like I said, maybe OpenAI is the last deep tech that we can say, yeah, it's the sort of deep tech that made a difference. Because again, OpenAI is a deep tech. Think about it. They created GPT. We are where we are today because of GPT. That's phenomenal. I don't particularly agree with, the hype messages. I mean, again, they're playing the game. Sam Altman is playing the game, but you got to recognize the reality and the fact that they invented GPT, which is truly a phenomenal technology. It's an amazing technology. I love it, actually. It's phenomenal. Forget the chat. You can use GPT for all sorts of different things. I've spoken about this before as well. Again, another example, a deep tech company, if you fund it properly, look what it can do. There you go. Right? Same thing with Anthropic, deep tech company. Look what it's doing. Mistral, I mentioned Mistral in Paris. Same thing. You give them loads of money. Look what they can do. The proof is in the pudding. But I'm so frustrated, guys. I'm really frustrated because, we're seeing so many talents that probably by now would have won Nobel Prizes as well. So let's hope that this could be a start of something new. A new era where finally politicians and governments get their heads out of their asses and realize, you know what? We need to intervene. We need to support innovation and innovative deep tech companies and really forget Elon Musk and all that bullshit in the world and start focusing on startups and entrepreneurs that actually are building something useful. Let's hope so. Let's hope so. As always, guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. You know what to do. To support us, check out all the links to the sponsors in the description below. Make sure you subscribe, share, like, the usual stuff. And again, keep the conversation going. Tell us what you think below. If you don't agree with me, feel free to argue. This is my opinion. Everything I've shared with you is an opinion, but again, it's an opinion based on my personal experience. I was part of that cohort. Like I said, I've seen it all. I've done it all. And I feel that, we're not doing the right thing, guys. As a global society, things need to change. But if you don't agree, feel free to rant your ideas below. Make sure you tell me on what basis, what is the data and the evidence of your argument. Go for it. Let's have this conversation. Let's have this conversation because we need to have this conversation. And I'm sure we all want to see more startups like DeepMind achieving this phenomenal achievement. Don't you? I think I do, because that means that we've got more innovations, more ideas, more truly amazing talents, really bringing positivity to the world. Boy, don't we need that now, do we? So, guys, thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you very soon. Peace.